Good morning, Seller Sessions, and happy Monday. I have with me today for the third time in the row. How lucky are we and how blessed are we to have Miss Courtney with us again? Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's so great to be here. Thank you, Isabella. Thank you for having me
Of course.
again. Oh my gosh. This is
My
amazing.
pleasure.
January is our month, and February too, since we're actually going to be together in February,
I
which
know. And then March because it's my birthday month. And then, April because it's spring. And
you're going to have to come to Italy at that point.
I would love that. That's one place I haven't been yet. And I know everybody's always curious, like, oh my God, you lived in Romania. You've never been to all these places. I'm like, no, I was broke. I couldn't even get out of my city. It's like, it's so cute because, people don't know. And they're like, oh, yeah, it's like one of those things where you like live in San Diego and you don't really go to the beach. I'm like, same but different because it's it's not it's not exactly the same, but okay. But now that I'm an adult.
Someone once told me of like these people in Thailand who are trying to get you to, use their services, and they always say same but different.
Yes, that's where I got that from, actually, because I used to live in Burma and I used to go to Thailand once a month, and oh my God, it's just so beautiful living in other cultures because you assimilate some of that. It's like every place you live in, you get a little bit of that culture, you get a little bit of that like love that they have in their life, and it's really amazing. Like that's one thing, one one great thing about being an adult is usually you're able to afford to go to other destinations and live in some of them. So
And
yeah,
if
it
you
was a
can't afford it, go back and listen to our last episode.
yes, about the money part, right? First it was faith, and then money, and now of course we have to close our three-part series with love. You know what's so interesting, Courtney? I was looking up the word love. I wanted to see what the definition was, and I have not found in any of the definitions that I looked up, they never talked about love of self. It was always love is a feeling very strong emotion or feeling you have for another person or a thing. And I thought that was very interesting because I never looked up the word love. And it's always about loving somebody else, and not once that I see any website or any dictionary talking about love of self.
Wow.
That's a
Wow.
crazy revelation, right?
Super crazy. Super crazy. And also, what are your thoughts on that? Because I have a lot of thoughts on that. But when you found that, where did it take you in terms of what you've uncovered for yourself in love and what it means to you?
So I think for me, probably because I've done so much work on myself for the past few years, that was the first thing that stood out. It was like, wow, they're not talking about the love of self. And for somebody working on themselves for so long, it's like the first thing you look for is like, how can I love myself more? So it was very interesting that in dictionary.com, you can look it up right now, like they don't even talk about that. And I thought that was strange. But you see, a few years ago, had I done that, it would have seemed normal. Love is something you have for somebody and something outside yourself. So when that happens, it's almost like, you are never really complete unless you have that other thing or the other person that you can have love for. And
Mm-hmm.
I think you can really have love for others or love for really anything if you don't know how to have love for yourself. That's the first thing that came to my mind when I read that.
Absolutely. I think a lot of people actually do outsource love. They outsource love. They say, okay, if this person likes me or treats me in a certain way or elicits certain hormones in me, right? Because, lots of times we just associate it with a hormonal response, right? Like we're emitting oxytocin or estrogen, if we're females, we're emitting more estrogen or, progesterone. Like we're basically saying, okay, so this chemical response to this thing that's happening outside of me equals love, right? And so then what happens, and it's quite it's quite interesting actually, as it becomes this kind of loop, right? Where like you need to search for, you need to get it from somebody else. And as long as that reaction is occurring from that outside source, then you're satisfied. I would put it differently, you're satiated for a little bit, right? And then there's a need for more, and there's a need for more. And what people discover, I think, when they're on the kind of journey that you've been on for so long is, well, you know, for at least, I mean, you've been on it really, I think, almost your
Since
whole life.
birth.
You're coded that way, right? And some of us are, and I bet a lot of people who are listening to this are just kind of coded to search for more and to probably not be in that category that outsources everything, you know, to forces that are outside of their, I don't want to use the word control, but let's say conscious choice. Because there's a big difference between what we control and what we choose. So we'll get to that maybe in a second. But what happens is lots of times we do this, right? And we call this phenomenon love. But really, if we look at it, right, I want you to think about it for a minute, that if you were actually looking for that response within you, okay, and you were maybe even imagining someone else and the effect that someone else has on you, you could elicit that same chemical response in your body, right? And you could feel that same surge of what we call love, right? And so in a sense, you sort of have control over that reaction, but again, you think you outsource it. So this is one of the interesting things that we lose track of, or we forget, is that we're actually the ones who are responsible for that feeling of love. We're the ones who are responsible for the feeling of satisfaction. We're the ones who are responsible for the feeling of peace. We're the ones who are responsible for the feeling of joy. And we can elicit those emotions through a real chemical response in our body at any time that we choose. But we forget that. And again, we think other people do it. But again, I would just remind anyone listening, or, you know, you, or, you know, we can do this at any time. And we know that, right? We know that, but we just forget it. We forget it in the moment. And so that's one sort of layer of love, and one way that love is typically looked at and thought of. But there's another layer that's directly associated with that, which is when you're sourcing internally like that, what you're really doing is you're connecting with that truth that we've talked about in the last couple of interviews. You're connecting to what's most true in you. You're connecting to what's most divine in you. You're connecting to, however you want to call it, the 0-point field, infinite intelligence, however you want to refer to it, but you're connecting to that. And that is actually the source of all love, the source of all joy, the source of all happiness. And so that's one of the reasons why we also say to do certain practices that you and I talked about in previous interviews, is so that you can actually source that from within. What happens when you start to do that is that you're not only not reliant on other people to create that response within you, but what happens is when you're no longer reliant on other people, you are what's called self-reliant. And so when you're self-reliant, what happens is you start to become that magnetic field that draws in a lot more of what it is that you want, or that feeling of love, as we refer to it. But again, it doesn't come from anything, you know, it's the outside response to what's happening inside of you.
There's so much I want to say on that. But I think what came to my mind as you were speaking is, you know, a lot of people weaponize love, you know, in the sense that, and maybe that's a little harsh to say, but, you know, I love you only if, you know, only if you kind of fit into this box that I created for you. And we do that with our kids, and we do that with our family, you know, as long as you agree to be of the same political party as me, then I love you. I mean, people don't say this, but through their actions and through their responses and through their triggers, you know, which is why it's so sad to see, you know, some people say, well, I don't really want to go to Thanksgiving with my family because we always have this issue, you know, and it's like, I don't feel the love because I think differently than they are. So it's like, when we do this, we put people in separate boxes, and, you know, I love my kid only when he gets A+ at school. And again, you don't say this to your kid, but by the actions that you show him, you know, when he gets an A and you're full of love, and then he gets a D, or, you know, whatever the grading system is here in US. Haven't got to experience that yet, but, you know, they say, oh, you're a bad kid, you don't do this, like people show them no love, and it's like, wow, okay, so love is when I do this, and this gets passed down to their kids and their kids and their kids. But if we were able to kind of separate that, and I love you regardless of like what your math scores are. And it's of course it takes a lot of practice, and it's not something you learn overnight. But if we're aware of the things we do and say to our kids and our families and our parents and our co-workers, I think it would make it a little bit more of a smooth ride, rather than placing everybody in that box. That it comes back again to that self-love. Like when you love yourself fully and you have a lot of appreciation for yourself, somebody's grade is not really going to affect your love for that person. It's just getting A's is going to add to it. It's going to be even more overflow with love. But yeah, I feel like we tend to make that mistake a lot, where it's like, oh, I only love you if you do these things for me. What do you think about that?
I think that's a really prevalent phenomenon for sure. I think in general, we tend to conflate love with approval or acceptance. And probably that's actually just a very primordial response to wanting to fit in, right? We want to fit in, because not fitting in means ostracism. It means banishment from the community. It means basically you're dead, right? So we want to fit in. And what happens is when we try to do that, what we're doing is we're becoming, we assume an identity. So we say, okay, in order to get love, I need to do X, Y, Z, right? And if I don't do that, then I won't make the mark, and I won't receive that love. And vice versa, like you said, lots of times people can put that on us, or it can seem that people are putting that on us, whether it be parents, friends, loved ones, so-called loved ones, friends, so-called friends, is like they're putting that on us, those kinds of expectations that say, as long as you fit into this mold, I will love you. So that is definitely something that is frequently seen. And I think it's really, really important as individual forms of human consciousness for us to break free of that mold, to say, to again come back to that self-reliance and that self-love, to say you're lovable no matter what. And I'm going to teach that to you so that you can actually expand your consciousness in a way that allows you to move into more of who you're meant to be. Because what ends up happening when we constrict love in that way, when we try to control love in that way, is what happens is most of the time what we're doing is we're shrinking the identity. We're shrinking the ways in which you can show up, because the other ways are not acceptable, right? So it means, okay, you can't do this because, again, like you said, you won't receive love, or you can't be this because then you won't receive love. And so what happens is when we start to give that to ourselves unconditionally, which means, okay, how am I showing up in love for myself and for others today, whether that looks right through the lens of society or not? What ends up happening is we start to expand, and we start to move into it. And what's going to happen when you expand is that some people are going to fall by the wayside. Some people that you might even have really, really loved are going to fall by the wayside, or you thought you loved, or they thought they loved you. But again, there's a non-acceptance there. When there's a non-acceptance, it's that isn't love, right? Because love is literally you uniting with everything. So when I say I'm in love, when I feel love, it's a connectedness with everything and everyone. And there is no opposite to that. There's no opposite to that. So when you can give that to yourself, then you start to feel that. And again, you start to expand into who you're meant to be. Does that make sense?
That is such a beautiful way to put it. Absolutely agree. And, going into relationships, and, how most people view their life partner, it's, we even have a saying, it's like, oh, my better half or my other half. And we always speak these things into existence. My other half. Like, what a strange thing to say, right? Like, it's almost like you literally have no chance of being ever full, because you're always looking for that half that will complete you. And we're never really thought of how to become full ourselves, so we can be that full person for somebody else, because what a pressure that is to be somebody's half. It's like, because halves barely ever do they match, even if that was true, right? Like if I was a half of something and my partner is a half of something, what are the odds and the chances that out of the billions of people that exact half will fit? It's almost impossible. The chances are slim to none. And then we meet that person and we're like, this is it, this is the half. And then that infatuation lasts for 6 months or a year or whatever, and then kids come, and then this, and it's like, what happened to my half? Is because that half was supposed to be a full. And because it's a half, the other half that we're talking about, it's not really the half that we're looking for. And we're never taught how to be full of love ourselves. So then when we meet the other person, doesn't matter how different they are and what part of the world they come from, because you are full yourself and the other person is full themselves, you can live in a beautiful relationship full of love for the rest of your life, because now you're both full of love and you don't need somebody else's love to validate your love, but it's nice to have. And again, it's like when people say, oh, did you find your half or your better half, it's like automatically right out the gate, we're never giving the chance to be full ourselves. And I always thought that was a strange thing to say, my half, my better half, or my worse half, or whatever. It's like a funny thing, but people take that serious.
I'm so glad you're bringing this up, because lots of times when we talk about love, people just automatically look at the romantic type of love, right? And they do. Again, this is another very common narrative. And I think it was Oprah actually who said something like, Jerry Maguire screwed it up for everybody, because it was this idea that you complete me, right? Like, again, I'm not whole without you. And she sort of challenged that, I know, in certain episodes and things that she did, because that can be very, very detrimental to your psyche. That exactly what you said, that I need someone to complete me. I am not whole on my own. And actually the best relationship advice I ever heard was from Dr. Joe Dispenza. And he said, I want you to write out a list of all the qualities you would want to have in an ideal partner, you'd want to see, or you'd want to match up with an ideal partner, and then go out and be it. Go out and be that. And I remember hearing that, and actually at the time I had already kind of been on my path to do that. I had thought of like, who would I want to be that? Well, am I being that? I mean, would you want to be with you? And for sure, like when I started out on that path, I don't think I would have wanted to be with me. There were so many things that I hadn't cleared up, I hadn't cleaned up, I hadn't figured out, I hadn't moved past, I hadn't, I wasn't the person that I am today. But the cool thing is you can become that person. And as you become more and more of that person, what happens is actually, it's a kind of an interesting thing that happens, because you're no longer searching. You no longer feel like you're lacking. You're not in lack. So that idea of I need my other half to fulfill me, or I'm not complete unless I find something, that vanishes. And then all of a sudden you're in this really fun playground, where you can sort of experiment and see and figure out what you like, what you don't like. And it's, again, based on what you're learning about yourself and that self-exploration that a lot of people don't go through, because they don't do what we talked about in the second step, which they don't free themselves from the confines of what's expected of them. And instead they live within a predetermined identity that they have either created, well, they co-created with various elements of society, including parents, teachers, what have you, right? So again, I would suggest, anyone listening, if you're joining because you wanted to hear about like a romantic love, is like, well, if you wouldn't want to be with you in your current state right now, then what would you want to be with, or who would you want to be? And then go out and be it, because you really can. And I think that's one of the things that you and I've talked about in so many other interviews we've done, is like how to become, right? Because one of the concepts that I've seen over and over throughout the literature, expressed in various different ways, is you don't get what you want, you get what you are. You get what you're being, you get what you become. You don't attract what you desire. That's why you don't just sit under a tree and wish for a Ferrari. Not that necessarily everyone would want a Ferrari, but you don't do that, right? You actually align to the truth of that kind of wealth. We were talking about wealth in our last interview, but in this case, you align to the truth of love. When you align to the truth of love, you no longer feel any kind of separation from love. Therefore, you don't necessarily need anyone to fulfill that, because you're fulfilled. You are fulfilled. And when you're fulfilled, it's like, it's like, oh my God, there's just this onslaught of interest, but that's because you're shining. That's, again, rage against the dying of the light. So, yeah.
I saw Collateral Beauty yesterday, the movie with Will Smith, and it's older. I am 100% certain you've seen it, where he writes 3 letters to that, to love, and to time. And oh my God, Collateral Beauty. But he talks about the rage against the dying of the light. I'm not going to tell you what happens in the movie since you haven't seen it, but you should definitely see it. I mean, if you want to cry, that is. Always. It's so funny you said Ferrari. You see how it's like culture here. Like most people in US would say Lambo. Like the Lamborghini is what's hot in US, is the trend. Even though, like, I remember like being in Romania, Ferrari was like the status, like, oh, like I had never even seen one until I moved to US. You know what I mean? But anyway, that's beside the point. I just thought I'd make a.
I live in Italy, so it's Ferrari, Lamborghini, Mazda, like it's obviously.
Of course,
Ferrari was the first one that came, but
the land of luxury where you are. I love it. So
exactly.
Beautiful. I love nice things.
The land of love.
Like you can exactly. I mean, love is really all there is. It's when we feel love, we feel at our highest happiness level, and it's like I guess everybody's goal in this life is to be happy. Of course, they attach different things to it, like what they think will make them happy. Maybe living in a luxurious place with luxurious cars, and having all the money at their disposal, and that's love as well. Like everything is love. Somebody that's a writer, that's love. They love their writing. They love knowing that their writing will be read by somebody. That's love. The love, it's in so many things. It's not just like love for a partner. I mean, that's a small part of this whole complex system of love. Love for each other, love for things, love for living. It's a beautiful thing, and I'm glad we have love. I think love is really love is really the fuel, I think, to everything that we do. And it's, as I said, it's sometimes it's saddening to see how we weaponize it. And I'm not Saint Mary or or Buddha. I do it myself, which is why I'm able to recognize it. And I think the best thing about becoming aware of the things you do is that you are starting to realize, like, oh my God, I have been doing that myself. And then sometimes that's all it takes, is of like being self-aware of your thoughts and being self-aware of your actions, and that's sometimes enough to make that change, because it's it's a big deal to go from being one way to being a completely different way tomorrow, which is why most diets don't work, most New Year resolutions don't work, because we try to make such a huge jump, and I never hear of anybody being able to do that immediately. It's like baby steps, and most people don't have that patience to take those baby steps to get to where they want to become. And with love, just like anything else, it's just part of working on it. What can I do today myself to love myself a little more? What can I do to love my kid more unconditionally than I have? That's not, because everybody feels your love, like people feel when your love is conditioned by something. You can still love somebody fully, but if there are conditions, people will feel. They will feel that. They're like, well, she loves me, but there's something there. There's something there I can't put my finger on. And that thing that most people can't put their finger on is like your gut feeling telling you like it's not full love. And it goes with really anything, it goes same thing with money, same thing with really any transaction in your life. It's like if you have some type of reason behind it, people will feel it, I think.
Mm. Yeah, I think love, when you are, as you say, weaponizing it, or when you're using it in kind of manipulative ways, you're all up here. Like, you're all in the mind. And your mind is powerful, no doubt. You and I've talked a lot about the mind and the power of the mind, but you're not really in the truth of what love is. Like, love defies a verbal description. It just defies verbal description. I mean, we can talk about it in all sorts of ways. We can say it's this, it's that, the other, but we don't really get at it. It's almost like we're pointing at something, but it's not the thing. We're pointing at an idea, but it's not the idea itself. Whereas when you go into your heart, when you actually take a time out, and I'm referring to your heart because for most people, it's in that mind, right? And that mind has a very strong electromagnetic field, thousands of times stronger actually than your cerebral mind. So when you go into that mind and you actually, cars honking, they're like, yes, we love it.
Is that your Ferrari?
Yeah, it's someone's Ferrari, obviously, that doesn't want to be stolen. But anyway, I love it. It's like little music for our episode. So when you go into that mind, when you go into the heart mind, which sometimes, again, you can experience this in other body minds. Like you might experience it in your pineal gland or your pituitary gland, where you're actually connecting to, again, that thing that we call love, that we try to describe verbally, but that, like I said, defies description. But you can feel it. You can feel it in an instant. And what I would suggest for people who are in feeling a lack of love, or they're not connected to it in that moment, is go to a time. Give yourself a timeout. Remember a time when the light in you was shining so brightly that almost you couldn't stand it. You almost couldn't stand it. You cried or you wept. I mean, I remember when my daughter was born, I cried for hours. I cried so much that I had a fever a couple hours later because I had worked myself into such a frenzy, because I was like, how can people experience this miracle every second of every day? It just seemed astonishing. I couldn't believe the love that was filling my being was so immense that I couldn't even handle it. And I've had other moments, like, in very different ways, but other moments of experiencing such a pure love, such a there's basically, again, no separation from your individual form of human consciousness, and the truth of actually what you are, and the truth of what the universe is, and the truth of actually what's available to you at any given moment in time. So again, love is it's this thing that is always there, and it's connected to the everyone-ness and the everywhere-ness, and it's in quantum mechanics is like non-locality. It's like you are me, I am you. I feel no separation. Therefore, I can feel no lack. Therefore, I can feel no envy. I can feel no frustration. I can feel no anger. I can feel no fear. And by the way, those things are not the opposites of love. They're literally just your separation, or your illusion of separation from that force. And so when you're feeling that, the only thing you actually have to do to align yourself to love, if you're not as familiar with the emotion of love on a frequent basis, because the more you practice this, the more you will be, and the more you'll just be in love. You'll be in love with life. Like I could barely sleep last night, and I apologize for that, because I didn't get it. Like, the full moon's coming, I'm like, full moon's rising. I'm just like, I was all in a frenzy. But it's like, I'm so excited to live. I'm so excited to meet my day that, and it's late here in Italy now, but it's like, I've just been all day kind of at it, because I'm in love with life. And when you're in that flow, so if you're not in that flow, like what I suggested, like I said a moment ago, is literally whenever you're feeling that you're not in it, get back to it by simply remembering a time. And maybe at the beginning, you're remembering something small. You remember when someone did something kind for you. You remember seeing a stranger who just smiled at you. You know, I walk around, obviously in Italy, masks are mandatory again now, but I you know, a lot of times I'll be out in the woods, I kind of like pull it down or whatever. I meet people always with a smile in my eyes. Always. There's a smile in my eyes, and there's a love for life in my eyes and in the way I encounter people. And then I get that back, and I'm like, what a gift. You know, we are, that is our nature. Anything else is actually not true. It's just not true. So in that moment, you actually have to deny that and move back into your truth for you to be experiencing more and more of that, for you to have that desire to get up. Because that is like the ultimate love is I want to meet this day. I'm in love with this moment. I am making love to the moment. You know, when you feel that way, you're just like, that's kind of that unstoppable energy, and not unstoppable in a make it happen kind of way, but an unstoppable and let it happen, unstoppable in a let it happen because it's so magnificent kind of way. That makes sense?
Oh, such a poet. So beautiful.
I didn't even know.
I'm so glad you mentioned, giving birth. It's like what a blessing we have as women to be able to create new life on this planet. I mean, if that's not the ultimate love, I don't know what is. And going back to the movie that I saw yesterday, Edward Norton is in it, and somebody asked him about like when his daughter was born, and he said, I didn't feel love. I had become love when I held her. And I thought that was such a beautiful thing to say from a man, because, even though he wasn't the one giving birth, but, the bond was so strong to his daughter being born that he immediately felt love, like running through him. And we feel love a lot of times in our life, and it's almost like a drug. Like we chase it over and over again. We want to feel that again. And I think that exercise that you did, and I hope people really caught that, and I think it's worth mentioning again and again. And one of the exercises that I've been blessed by you to teach me how to do is, in a meditative state, or just, by closing your eyes, even if there's nothing that you feel love towards right now or feel happy about, go back to a time in your life where you did, and relive that moment over and over and over again until you are full of that love again. And then, that's, because always people think, I have nothing, I'm starting from zero. But really, we don't start from zero unless you're born right now, like in this very second. Then I will allow you to say that you have absolutely nothing in the past. We don't know what's beyond that. But if you had experiences in your life, I'm sure at least one point in your life, doesn't matter how tough your life has been, that you were so filled with love and so filled with happiness that you can always go and draw upon that specific instance and memory to bring that joy into your life. And that's why a lot of philosophers and, I don't know, astrologers and people like me and you, Courtney, we talk about time in such a way that, time is not really real, in the sense that, we can experience the sensations and these feelings at any time we want. Like we think future is so far away, and we think the past is so far away, but really, there has never been a time where I felt like I was in the past, or there has never been a time where I felt like I was in the future. I've always been in the present moment right now. So if I'm now, and I was in the now a year ago, and I will be in the now 10 years from now, it's all happening now. So that means I can bring that experience back into my life and feel happy now, and feel love now, and feel wealthy now, and feel this now. And I think that's a beautiful tool that we all have in our arsenal that we're not aware of. And it's like the simplest things are what makes life. And it's like we are always trying to find something that it should be difficult, otherwise it's not worth it, or I'm not going to be healed because it's not difficult enough. I'm not going to be wealthy because I haven't gone through suffering and through mud and through all of this. It's like we always expect, great reward to come with such huge responsibility and such a long road and tough road. But do we really have to?
No, I'm actually talking a lot about this in my second book, like the difference between, a classical approach to change, or basically classical physics approach to change, and a quantum approach to change. And so you're kind of hitting it right on the head. And there's so much to unpack in what you said. Like, I kind of love the fact that you talk about a child and you say, well, if you're taking off from zero, right? Like, if you think about it, that's the 0 point. That's the 0 point. That's the field. Like that's where all potentiality exists, right? If you look at matter, if you look at an atom, which is the basic building block of the entire universe, right? It's 99.9999999% what we thought, or what we would describe as space. But really what it is it's a flow of energy and information. It's an exchange, it's a dance. It's a dance of energy and information. So 99.9999999% of what you are is actually a dance of energy and information. And the 0.0000001% or more is the particle, is the physical, identity that you associate yourself with because you've been molded into that. And if you look at a child and you look at them as like the 0 point field, or the point of all potentiality, right? It's like you can see it in a child. Like, they're playful, they're actually in that being place. Like, I was watching a video the other day of this little girl. She must have been, I don't know, a few months old, and she's laughing like this person is just, I don't know, pressing some kind of button, and she sees this thing goes off and she's just dying. She just thinks it's the most fabulous thing in the world, right? And it's like, that is actually how we are designed to be. But because we get molded through the ways that we were talking about earlier to sort of fit in, right? And you can't stick out, and you can't do a lot of the spectacular things that you might want to do if you're so busy fitting in, right? So you lose sight of like the fact that actually at any given time you can actually become something different. And you also said something really, really important that sort of like I want to feed into this. What we're talking about is when you were talking about Edward Norton, you were talking about that scene of like feeling versus being love. And again, that's where when you're in that place of infinite potentialities, or where you're talking about time and space collapsing and all of that, you have the possibility to be it, to become it, to embody it, to know it. And again, that's one of the reasons why we go in to look inward to look for love. And we might initially do that through an experience, but then you don't need the experience anymore after a little bit. Like, you just go in and you just feel that. You feel that sense of connection. You feel that sense of love. You know it because you are it. So that's a huge distinction. And then the way you actually do that most of the time is what you came to at the very end of your discussion, which is here and now. In Italian they say qui e ora, here and now, right here, right now, what's going on. And if you can avoid all the ramblings of the mind about, who you were yesterday or who you think you're going to be tomorrow or whatever, and you can actually just say, whoa, what's happening right now? I get to talk to somebody I absolutely adore. I get to talk to other people who I'm sure I would adore just as much, because you're here, you're listening, you're invested in yourself. You love yourself enough to actually say, I'm going to show up for this, because that's, a rarity in these days, is to actually take the time out for yourself, because you say, okay, I'm invested in my growth. I'm invested in my becoming more of what I want. So you're here, you're now. Take advantage of it. If you do that, like you're saying, then you become more in love with life. Then you want to experience more of that. Then you do wake up with that desire to like, oh my God, like a kid, like I literally wake up like that. I'm like, what now? What do I get to do now? And sometimes it's overwhelming, because I'm like, okay, you need to sleep, like at 4 a.m. or 3 a.m, but I'm so on fire. So, okay, I might sleep later on in the day, whatever, but I'm so on fire to create what I'm creating, what's being created through me, that I just kind of, can't even help myself. But that's like a little kid, so yeah.
What a great point. It's like, we meet people and, we almost like sometimes we expect them to fix us. And it's such a different reaction when you meet somebody that's already full of love for themselves, it's like we're automatically attracted to that energy. We're like, oh, I love that. It's because there's absolutely no pressure to be anything or anyone that you are not, because the other person that you're having a conversation with or a meeting with or a relationship with, they're so full of love that intrinsically that they expect nothing of you but to be exactly who you are. And what a relief that is. Imagine going into a relationship and knowing there's nothing expected of you, and that person loves you exactly the way you are because they're already full of love themselves. There's nothing in them that's missing, that they're looking in you. They're accepting you the way you are because they're already full of the love themselves, and you're just adding to that, like the cherry on top. And I can't imagine having greater feeling in the world than being accepted the way you are and not being a half, not coming into a relationship. And again, it can be for anything. It can be a business relationship, it can be really any kind, but knowing that the other person is full, it almost gives you a sense of like, I can just relax in this feeling. I have no need to be anybody that I am not. And if we could all work on ourselves to be full of that love for ourselves, then we will have no pressure on other people to be who they are not. And those who would be attracted to that field of energy would be those who are exactly like us. And this is how you teach other people to be full of love themselves and not say, okay, come here because I can fix you. And this is what happens. And, I read books or see documentaries on like abusive relationships. And it's like, those who have really great relationships, we tend to have that superiority, feel like, oh, well, if they could only be like me, then they would be fine. Like, why don't they just leave that relationship? You hear women being abused, and sometimes men too. And they can leave because now they're dependent on that person to offer them that love that they're looking for. So even though the abusive part, it's much longer and much harder than those tiny moments of love, they still don't leave because that little love fills their cup for that specific time. But if we could only be full of love ourselves, we would never allow ourselves to be in any type of relationship like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, most definitely. And I think you hit it perfectly in the sense that it doesn't matter what kind of relationship you're trying to cultivate. If you are working on yourself and you're showing up as the best you can be, then you're doing the ultimate service for everybody. And then what happens is, like you said, you're not trying to fix anyone. I remember years and years ago, like I was always trying to fix you. Like a long time, like I used to think, okay, I got some kind of magic recipe or whatever. And then I realized, oh, wow, I don't have your recipe. I don't have anyone's recipe. It's actually one of the things now, especially, it's funny because now, especially, lots of folks come to me and they say, kind of fix me. And I always say, like, that's not my job. Like, I can't do that. And I always tell people, like,
you're 10 years too late, my friend.
Exactly.
If you come to me 10 years ago, I would have fixed you. You would have been good.
I would have tried to fix you, but I didn't realize right at the time that actually it was me, right? Because that's the other thing is, like, when we're standing outside and we're judging, what are we judging? Like, if you look at the current state of affairs, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of judgment, there's a lot of this. But what is it? What is it? Again, that's that part of you that you haven't reconciled, or you haven't come to terms with, or you haven't faced, and you haven't loved. You haven't loved that part of you. You haven't loved that part of you that might be, have some tendencies that are very egotistical, or, you haven't loved that part. You haven't accepted and said, oh, yeah, you're there, and that's okay, and I still love you. And then when you do that, what happens is that part starts to kind of quiet down because it doesn't need to be expressed through and as you anymore. And then more of what you actually truly are as a divine creation starts to shine through. And when that happens, and when you're actually, again, when you've committed yourself and you're devoted on following that path of love or self-discovery and self-reliance, which is all the same thing. When you're doing that and when you're being that, when you're becoming that, what happens is you no longer need to convince anything of everybody because you are of anybody of anything because you are it. So you're demonstrating that in your day-to-day, and what happens is people just like, what, what magic pill did you take? And then you can start talking about, what you're feeling and where you're coming from, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, that's pretty interesting. Where can I get, can I get some of that? Or there's a separation, and like you said, there's not a vibrational match at that moment, but it's at least opening a doorway. It's creating a possibility, a probability, or a potentiality in the mind and in the body minds of who it is who's interacting with you.
Mm. It's it obviously took me many years to get to where I'm at right now, as far as like how I think about certain things and how I react to certain things. And I remember when I first started making this move, I would get compliments like, oh, you're so beautiful, or you're so smart, or this or that. And, you know, um, living in Romania and, moving to US and all this, I've always had this like, oh no, that's, I've always had some type of response to that. And a lot of people do that. Like, oh no, I'm not beautiful. No, no. Like, oh, you're so smart. No, I'm not. Or, always like a reactive towards it. And it's exactly what the other person actually expected too. So it was like this game that, you have a person you're meeting and then they give you a compliment, you reject it. It's something that the complimentor expects anyway. And it's like a game that everybody's playing. And, I remember when I started switching from that, and it was definitely very hard, like getting a compliment and, oh my God, you're so smart, and saying, thank you. I agree. And it was almost like a shock, like, oh, aren't you cocky, or aren't you this, or aren't you that? I mean, it wasn't all the time that I had that feedback, but I did. And it was interesting to see how my response to a compliment switched that person's automatic response as well, because it's not something they were used to. Like, oh, you're so smart, thank you, I agree, I love that. And they're like, wow, aren't you Miss Confident over here? And it's a whole game. It's like, well, you gave me a compliment for me to reject it so you can feel okay with that. So it took me a long time, and to the point where, now is just part of my nature. Like, oh, thank you, I appreciate that, I really, I worked hard on that. And people are like, they're always taken aback. I could just tell in their facial expression, but I feel like at least now they're used to me saying that. So it's not like a shock anymore. But, we teach people through our actions and through what we do. So for me, telling my kid, hey, you better be confident, or you better say this, you better say that, that's not how he will learn. He will learn by seeing the things that I do, and how I present myself in my life is how he will present himself in his life. My mom made a comment to my kid the other day, like, you're such a genius. And he's like, my mom always says that, and it was just such a cute thing to say. And I never said to him, hey, remember, you have to tell people you're a genius. It's just, it's part now of like the ecosystem that I'm creating for him, to have that confidence, to know that he can do things himself, and he can become a genius himself if that's what he wants to be. And it's again, it's through our actions. And I know that, if there's another woman next to me that hears me taking that compliment in, maybe she will try it the next time without me having to say, you see, ladies, how I did it, like, you have to say this. No, it's like, by becoming that person who you are trying to become or embody, and then everybody else around you will just notice that and say, wow, I didn't know I can do that. Because most people think, oh, if I make myself small enough, then I will be accepted. If I pretend to fit in, then they'll like me too. And what I notice, the more I speak up and the more I am myself, the more love I get from people. And it's like, it's such a paradox because you would think it's the other way around. Like, oh, if I only pretend to be this kind of way, then I'll be accepted in this pack of wolves. But really, you standing out and becoming who you are is what will attract those wolves to you, because in the end, everybody wants that. Everybody wants to have that authentic love, to have authentic relationships and friends. And that's why you always hear people say, I'd rather have 2 3 friends, good ones, than 100 that are just there, that are not really good friends. And I think that's one way of getting there, is by being authentic yourself and giving yourself the most maximum love that you can, because only then you're able to allow and accept everybody else into your life, because you are already full of that love yourself. And everybody else, you just bring them around because they're fun, or they're funny, or they're this, or they're that. And then by you being so full, then it's like you're going to shed that love onto them, and then they're gonna be full, and then they're gonna do it to somebody else.
Right.
It's a beautiful game, I think.
Right. Well, and you said something really telling, because you said they, after a while, they start to accept that, or they start to respond differently. But actually, what's happening is you're expecting a different response. So when you first started the change, it was so uncomfortable, and you're expecting from your environment the typical response that you always got, and that you were conditioned to believe is the response, because there's A plus B equals C, right? And so you had this kind of formula in your head, and then when you started to shift it, oh my God, is that uncomfortable? Because then you're forming new synapses, you're creating new neural pathways, you're running new neural pathways, and so you're like, oh my God, how's this going to end up? And then as a response, people respond to that, right? It's like we really underestimate how people are responding to the narratives that we have going on in our minds, versus like what's actually happening. But when you start to actually give yourself that kind of self-love of saying, hey, you know what? Yeah, like you said, I worked really hard on that. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you so much, because that really helps me. Then it's a totally different, like you said, game where people can actually, it becomes a co-creative and an up-leveling rather than a down-leveling. So it's very true. And I suggest that anyone listening, just give it a shot. Give all of these things kind of a shot, in the sense of, at first it's going to be really uncomfortable, and it's going to feel like, oh, I'm not used to this. I'm not used to what it means to kind of tap into that love, or I'm not used to what it means to give myself enough love to accept and embrace a compliment or something, gratitude, and open my heart to it. But the more you do it, the more you start to change what's happening internally, and then externally what happens shifts as well. It's just the law.
Yeah. And it's so interesting. So last week when we did the episode on money, we had a lot of viewers online, and I couldn't help but notice that today we don't have as many. And I know people usually take their time and listen to the episode when it comes out, and that's beautiful. And thank you for everyone who listens and tunes in for us. It's just so interesting how this is also a sign of the culture that we live in. Like, we're talking about money, and a lot more people would be interested in that. And it's like, oh, love is just one of those extra things that I'll do it when I have time. It's like, we have our priorities wrong for most of the times. And again, we both know I love money, and I love the what money brings in, and the experiences you can have with money. But it's like, can you even have money, like that much money, if you don't love yourself, and if you don't know how to work with love? Because love is all there is, right? Like, if you don't love yourself, if you don't love your environment, if you don't love the people around you, could you really be as wealthy as you possibly could? And it's so interesting how we put these things as like in the I'll do it later box. And I feel like love is kind of put into that I'll do it later, I'll get to it when I'm not so busy, because I'm so busy trying to make money, I am so busy trying to do this, that I'll take care of love like 5 minutes before bed tonight. I'll think of it. And it's like, we have to be aware of even the things that we do, and we think, I don't have time to do this right now, I'll do it later. And it's like, how many things do we tell ourselves we're going to do later that are actually quite crucial and quite important? Just an observation.
Well, and you asked a question, a really important one, which is, you said, can you really have a lot of money if you don't have self-love? And the answer is yes, you can have a lot of money, but you can't have a lot of wealth. Not the same thing. So you can accumulate a lot of money and you can be very, very unhappy. Just like you can have no money, you can be penniless and you can be filled with joy and you have wealth. That is wealth consciousness, and that no one can take from you. No money, no amount of money that you have in the bank can take it from you. Nothing that you're wearing or not wearing, nothing that you're showing or not showing. You are the embodiment of it. And again, that comes back to what you're being, how you're showing up, what you're allowing into you, who you are becoming, and who you are showing up as. And that's a horse of another color. So, yeah.
Well, I think we did a good job today in depicting what love is, and even though there's not that much you can talk about in 1 hour, but I feel like we touched on some very important things that hopefully those who are listening can take home and maybe re-listen to this again and again to make sense. And I want to listen to it because it's one thing to talk about it again, and it's like writing reading a book. It's like, okay, I read a book, I get it, but sometimes you just have to read it again and again for it to really make sense. And these are like little gold nuggets that people leave you in this earth, like this episode. Like, we had no idea what we were going to talk about, right? But yeah, because we're so pure and we really want this message to come across, I think a beautiful episode came out, and we were both very honest and truthful with exactly how we feel, and I think people can feel that. And I love that we were able to do that. I love that we are alive right now to be able to do that. I love that we are healthy enough. I love that we are young. I love that we get to experience this life fully as it is right now in 2022, with everything, with the ups and downs and the happy moments and the unhappy moments. And I love that I was given this chance to be a human in this lifetime. I mean, there's so much to love, beside just the love for money and for family or for this. It's if you don't know what love is, start from there. Like, love the fact that you're alive, and how lucky are you to be alive and listening to this. So with that being said, I want to thank you, Cortney, so much.
Thank you, Isabella. It's always an honor and a privilege to be here with you, and everybody else who tuned in. Thank you very, very, very much. And you and I are going to see each other very soon, so maybe we've got like something live in person for everybody coming up.
Maybe we would do that. I know. Well, I love you, Cortney, my dear friend, and thank you.
I love you too. Ciao a tutti.